Welcome to the Explainer. You know, they say in Palm Beach County, Florida, your zip code can pretty much determine your destiny. Today, we're going to dig into the numbers behind the county's housing crisis. And let me tell you, they paint a picture of an inequality that is deep, that is persistent, and that was absolutely manufactured.
All right, let's start with a number, 77.3%. So what's that? Well, that's the percentage of white residents in Palm Beach County who own their own homes. And you know, for most people, a home isn't just a roof over your head, right? It's usually the biggest asset you'll ever own. It's the bedrock of financial stability, the key to building wealth for your kids and their kids.
Okay, now, here's another number, 52.3%. That's the homeownership rate for the county's black residents. The gap between those two numbers? It's huge. We're talking about a 25-point difference. And that's not just a statistic on a page. That gap represents a massive, real-world disparity in wealth and opportunity.
So you have to ask yourself, how does a gap that wide even come to exist? I can tell you one thing, it didn't happen by accident. To really get what's going on today, we've got to go back, way back, over a century actually, to see how the foundations of this county were put in place.
So, where do we start? Well, our story really begins in a time of open, blatant segregation. This is when the housing patterns we still see today were first created, and it was all part of a deliberate policy of containment.
And when you look at the timeline, you can see just how systematic this all was. It started back in the 1890s with settlements like the Sticks, places built for laborers kind of out of convenience. But what started as convenience pretty quickly hardened into official policy. By 1929, West Palm Beach literally made segregation official city policy. Delray Beach did the same thing in 1935. We're not talking about unspoken rules here. These were legally enforced lines drawn on a map, telling people where they could and could not live.
And this quote, it really gets to the heart of the matter. The whole system of Jim Crow, it wasn't just about social separation. It was an economic machine. It was designed from the ground up to cut off Black Americans' access to opportunity. And the shockwaves of that system are still being felt today, generations later.
Okay, so that's the history. But how does all of that actually show up in the numbers? Let's look at the hard economic data for Palm Beach County right now.
Well, for starters, the income gap is just stark. Look at this. In 2021, the median income for a white household was over $81,000. For a black household, it was just under $53,000. To put that in perspective, that means black households were earning only about 68 cents for every single dollar earned by white households.
And, you know, that income gap has a direct knock-on effect. It fuels a huge poverty gap. The poverty rate for black residents is 18.5%. For white residents, it's 7.4%. That's more than double. This is a perfect example of how historical disadvantages don't just fade away, they actually compound over time.
And then there's this number, 0.52. Now, what is that? It's called the Gini Index, and it's basically a scorecard for income inequality. 0 means everyone has the same income, perfect equality. The closer you get to 1, the more unequal things are. So at 0.52, Palm Beach County has one of the highest rates of income inequality in the entire state of Florida. It points to a massive chasm between the wealthy and the poor.
So this isn't just some relic of the past we're talking about. This inequality is actively kept alive today to the modern systems that decide how much a property is worth and who gets a loan to buy a home. And one of the most powerful and destructive tools used to create this gap was something called redlining. This wasn't just a few banks being discriminatory on their own. No, this was a government-sanctioned practice. It's exactly what it sounds like. Officials and banks would literally draw red lines on maps around minority neighborhoods. And if you lived inside that red line, good luck getting a mortgage or any kind of investment. You were effectively cut off. The whole system was, well, brutally simple. They color-coded maps. If your neighborhood was green, you were golden. Best for investment. Loans are easy to get. Blue was still desirable. But then you get to yellow. Those areas were labeled declining. And the reason was often, and I'm quoting here, infiltration by minority groups. And then there was red, labeled hazardous. These were neighborhoods with significant black populations, and they were almost completely shut out of the financial system. It basically starved these communities of the money they needed to grow and thrive. And make no mistake, the ghost of redlining is still with us. It's baked right into today's property values. A recent analysis, just from 2023, found that the median home in a predominantly black neighborhood in Palm Beach County was appraised for $310,000. In a predominantly white neighborhood, $420,000. That is a $110,000 gap, and it's a direct echo of those decades of disinvestment.
And again, this isn't just some dusty old history lesson, it's happening right now. Look at loan applications from 2020. More than half, 52.5% of black applicants trying to buy a home were denied. For white applicants, that number was 27.4%. So black applicants were denied almost twice as often. It's a staggering difference.
Now, the official reasons given for these denials are usually things like debt-to-income ratio or credit history. And on the surface, that sounds fair. But you have to remember, these numbers don't exist in a vacuum. They are the direct result of a history that systematically prevented people from getting good jobs, from earning enough money, and from building the credit they now need to get a loan. So as Palm Beach County keeps growing and changing, it's hitting a crossroads. And it's facing new challenges that could actually make these old divides even deeper. And here's a really painful, ironic twist. Those same historic communities, places like Pleasant City and Pearl City that were created by segregation, are now facing gentrification. New money is flowing in, which sounds good, but it's driving up property values and taxes like crazy. And that's putting immense pressure on the longtime residents, the very people who built these communities from the ground up.
And when we talk about displacement, it's not just about one thing. There's direct displacement. That's when you literally can't afford the rent or taxes anymore and you're forced to leave. But there's also indirect displacement, which means new, affordable places to live just stop being built. And then there's cultural displacement. That's when the whole vibe of a neighborhood changes so much, new shops, new restaurants, a new feel, that the original residents start to feel like strangers in their own community.
So what's being done? Well, in response to all this, there's a push for policies that are more proactive. For example, there's a rule called affirmatively furthering fair housing. The idea here is to go beyond just saying, okay, discrimination is illegal. Instead, it requires communities to actually look at their own housing patterns, identify where segregation still exists, and then take real, concrete steps to fix it.
When you look at the whole story of Palm Beach County, it becomes incredibly clear that fixing housing inequality isn't just about building more houses. It's about facing a really difficult history that literally shaped the ground beneath their feet. And that leaves us with a pretty big and pretty crucial final question. When you know that history is baked right into the landscape, what does it really take to build a community where every single person has an equal shot at having a home and building a future?